guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you my attempt at making another doll cake, this time Victoria from The Corpse Bride. Now I did make The Corpse Bride a while ago, so I thought this time we'll have a go at one of the other characters. So we're starting with some brown modelling chocolate, and I'm going to put this inside her body. So we're going to start with the doll part of the cake, and then I'll worry about baking the skirt part later on, the actual cake. So it means we can spend plenty of time on doing the body and the head without it going, well, without this cake itself going stale. So the ball I've pinched a neck into, and then we've kind of shaped the body by dragging it down towards a waist. If your shoulders look a bit wide, you can cut some off there. I'm going to put a wooden kebab skewer. So these are the ones that you put food on for barbecues and things. I'm going to push that down through the body. Now, if you find that the wooden kebab skewer is quite flexible, quite bendy, you might want to go for a thicker one, just so it's nice and sturdy within the body, because her head's going to be pretty heavy. So I'm going to roll a ball in modelling paste. Now this time I've got white and like a pale flesh colour mixed together, so a really pasty colour. And we're going to make it kind of a teardrop shape. And I'm going to just press in lightly where I want her eyes to go. Now I think I actually put her eyes a little bit too high up on her head compared to where they should have been, but I didn't really notice until it was too late. So I'm going to start pinching in a little bit of a nose. You can use modelling tools if you prefer to make this easier. And guys, what I'm going to do is I'll link below the video to all the tools and the equipment that I do use. So I use the Saracino modelling paste and modelling chocolate for this one, but I'll put links below. So I'm just working on shaping around that nose. Poke her a couple of nostrils in. I'm going to put a little slit in where I want her mouth to be. So I'm just using a craft knife. Pull open the mouth a bit more, and then what we're going to do is kind of pull down the bottom lip. And then I'm just going to nudge it slightly more closed. Just push a little indentation into either side of the mouth. I use these little rubber-ended Serrat tools. Again, I'll put links below the video, guys, if you want to know which ones I've used. If her chin's looking a bit big at this point, you can just trim a little bit off. You just don't want to use a modelling paste that sets very quickly, otherwise you won't be able to trim bits off or move the facial features around. If you don't get them quite right, it will dry and crack. So go for a paste that gives you a while to work with. We're going to put some marks in where I want her eyes to go. Now, looking at this now, I can see my eyes are just a little bit too high. I left too big a gap between where her nose is and her eye sockets are. So if you're doing yours, guys, try and have a picture of her to hand so that you can use for reference. We're going to fill each of those eye sockets with a round ball of white modelling paste. Pressing it down so it doesn't stick out too much from the side. And I decided I was going to give her little eyelids. It probably would have been easier if I left the eyelids off. We'll put a little black dot in each eye. Now you can paint it in with food colouring. I chose to just stick it in with a little bit of black modelling paste. And then we're going to roll a thin bit of black modelling paste to just put along the lower edge of that eyelid. I think I maybe should have done her so she was looking in a slightly different direction, but it's fine. And we're going to just give her a tiny bit of pink to her cheeks. So I'm going to use an edible powder. So you want quite a chunky brush, nothing too pointy. Keep it dry. You can use the loose powders. So I've got a pink candy one here. Or you can use like the palettes. So it's not makeup, guys, that I've got in the background. I was going to use the palettes, but I've actually got a mix of the pink from the palette with that candy pink as well together for her cheeks. We're just going to rub it on. Just make sure, you know, if you're planning on eating her, especially the head, that you are going to use something that's edible. So these are all edible here. I'm just going to darken around her eyes just a little bit. So I'm using like a charcoaly grey colour one. Don't go too heavy with this bit. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of the pink. Now this is one of the pinks from my Petal palettes. Again, I'll put links below, guys. I'm just going to put a little bit of that on her lips. So I don't want her to look too red on the lips. To keep it all fairly pale. Going to roll her some little eyelashes now. Just try and get some tiny points of black modelling paste. Nice and thin. We're just going to cut them off as little triangles, and then we're just going to stick them coming off that main big piece of black that I stuck along her eyelid earlier. And you can do this a few times to put a few different eyelashes on there. Keep them quite small, don't go too big. So we're going to stick around some eyebrows. I'm just using a dark grey, so I've mixed some white and black modelling paste together for those eyebrows. And I'm going to use some leftover skin tone that I have from the face to just add to the top of the neck on that skewer. We will need this to set quite firm before we actually attach her head, otherwise the paste will sink down and get a little bit fatter. So we're giving her a little ruffle of paste around the neck, around that collar. Just make sure you don't go too high up because it doesn't want to catch under the head itself, this little ruffle bit. Now, this paste that I'm using now is a mix of my Saracino modeling paste. So yeah, I've used black, red, and even a little bit of purple. So these were all pre-coloured modeling paste. We're going to roll it thin. I'm going to wrap it around that body, and I'm just going to try and smooth out the seam. Sometimes using the handle of my tools to kind of roll along the edge of the neck. And then we're going to draw in new seams down the edge of her bust and sides. I'm just texturizing the edge of her collar just a tiny bit so it looks a little bit lacier, and I'm just poking it with the edge of a craft knife. And we're going to cut a thin strip to go down the middle. And guys, you want the same colour again later for when we do the dress part, so the skirt part of this one later on. This is modelling paste I'm using at the moment, but you can use fondant if you want. I'm going to put a little stitching line down either side, or both sides even. Don't rush this bit, guys. And you're going to put some buttons on. Now, I put little holes where the buttons would go. So a little slit for each buttonhole. But to be honest, you didn't really see them. Once I'd put a little ball on for the button. You could see a tiny bit, but not a lot. So it's up to you whether you want to bother with that or if you prefer just to stick the buttons on without. It depends how much time you've got on your hands, I guess, for this bit. So you're just going to stick tiny little buttons all the way down. So just tiny balls of modelling paste. And because this one took me a while, guys, what I'll do is I'll try and speed up some parts of the video just so that you're not having to watch for quite as long. Also, apologies, I'm on a pretty squeaky chair today, so you might hear that in the background quite a bit. Put some more stitching lines down the side of her body on those seams that we drew out earlier. So now we need to paint on some stripes. You don't have to do it straight away. If you want to wait while the end and do all the stripes everywhere together, you can do. I was just keen to see what the stripes looked like. So I've got like an aubergine coloured edible powder here. I did add a bit of black to it, but actually I think I could have got away with just the aubergine colour on its own without adding the black. And I'm using one of my Silvia Mancini brushes because it was just the right thickness for my stripes. The powder is mixed with Rejuvenator Spirit, or you can use clear alcohol. It just means it evaporates and dries quite quick. For my head, guys, and I forgot to film this bit, so I do apologise, I've added a bit of grey paste just to the back of her head. You could use any colour really, just to round it off a little bit because she was quite flat on the back of the head. And you can just see a tiny bit of a seam between the grey and the head itself, so I'm just putting a little piece in there, flattening it out so that when her hair's over the top we don't have a dip at that point where the two pieces met. Now I've got some brown rolled fairly thin. We're going to wrap it around her head and then we're going to cut it off at the back. Now if it doesn't stick, guys, just put a bit of water between the head and this hair, or even edible glue. And then I'm just rubbing the back of her head on the work surface just to smooth out the seam where I've cut it. And then we're going to put some hairlines in. These are going to go towards where the bun will sit. So up near the back at the top of the head. And we're going to do 2 little ears. So I've got 2 balls of the skin tone. Just put a little dip in the middle of each one. I'm going to trim them off a little bit. Put a little snip just in the edge of the hairline, and we're going to tuck that ear under there. Apologies, I don't have a very well in shot, I don't think, for these bits, guys. If her head's a bit soft, guys, put this to one side, do it later. You don't need to rush to put her hair on. You could make this body and head way in advance of baking the cake. So you could do this 2 weeks in advance of when you actually want to make the cake, and she will just sit in a cardboard box waiting, ready to be stuck on the cake later. So it's just a ball for the bun with some little lines on. Make sure that's pressed firmly in place because you don't want it to drop off. If it wants to drop off, just put something underneath it just to hold it in place until it's started to firm up, and then you can remove it. So we're going to put 2 pieces of hair on the front, pull it down slightly to a bit more of a point in the middle, and I think it's a bit long, let's take a little bit off. And we're going to curl it up at each edge, and then we can put some little lines in that as well. So I'm just going to check that her head fits on nicely with the body. So I'm pushing that skewer in there just to check how it fits. Brilliant. I'm not going to leave it set in together like that. What I'm going to do is just put that to one side while we work on the cake. So guys, I'm completely cheating this time, and I'm using like a cake mix where all you have to do is add water. Again, I'll put links below to what I've used. I do sell most of this stuff in the shop, guys, but you don't have to buy it from me, but the links are there should you want to. So I'm adding some colour mel. I've got like a burgundy colour. I wanted to make the sponge a bit closer to the colour of her dress. It was a little bit pink, so we added a bit of black as well. And I'm going to use this, I don't know if it's called a tiffin tin, I'm not sure. But it's like the shape of a dress already. So I'm baking the cake in that. It looks a very different colour to what it looked in the bowl once it was cooked. But that's fine. I'm going to make some buttercream in a similar colour. Now, I did try to make my buttercream a little bit darker. And I used the colour mill again in that. It didn't go as dark as I wanted, but I think I maybe could have put a bit more colouring in, but I didn't want to put too much in there. So it's those two, the black and the burgundy are what I put in there. I actually made the buttercream with salted caramel flavoured icing as well, just so that there was a bit more flavour to it, because this one was just a vanilla sponge. So I'm going to stick my cake on a cake card that's a similar size to my cake. So my cake is about 6 inches at the bottom. It's falling apart a little bit on that bottom layer. So I did cut that cake into many layers as well, guys, because the cake tin wasn't overly tall and I want quite a tall skirt for her. So I thought if I cut it into many layers, there's many layers of buttercream going in there and it's going to add quite a bit of extra height. So we're going to pile that up till we've got all of the pieces of cake together. Now, if you want, guys, you can trim this cake to the exact shape you want for the dress. On this occasion, I was way too lazy and I just decided I was going to cover the whole lot in buttercream. I went fairly thick with the buttercream. And then I used like a flexible smoother to scrape any extra off from around the edges. And you will need to put this in the fridge for a bit just to firm up, because there's a lot of cake on there. There's a lot of weight bearing down on it. If you leave it out the fridge, the buttercream will squeeze out from each layer a little bit and show the bulges. So if I put it in the fridge, it's just going to firm up. While that's in the fridge, I've just made some fondant to match the colour of the body. I've also realised my cake is not tall enough. So what I'm going to do is put a piece of polystyrene that I've just stuck down with some chocolate ganache on a cake board ready. So I'm using a black cake board later. Put that to one side. I'm going to put a second layer of this buttercream on. Now you'll notice it's a slightly different colour this time. I added a little bit of chocolate ganache into my buttercream so that it would give me a slightly firmer outer layer once it had been in the fridge again. So smooth it off the best you can. And once that has been refrigerated and firmed up, I'm going to put a bit more chocolate ganache on top of that polystyrene. Now the polystyrene won't actually come into contact with the cake. So we're going to take this cake off this board. Don't forget it's got a separate thin cake card underneath this cake. And that's really important. That cake card has to be there if you're going to stick it on a piece of polystyrene. I should have really just baked more cakes so that we had more cake underneath. But it wasn't until I was partway through doing it that I realised it wasn't going to be as tall as what I wanted. So I'm going to put that on there. And I'm going to let that set before I start doing any work. So you can see my ganache is really quite wet and runny. I microwaved it too much. It's also got a big gap because I should have used a piece of polystyrene that was as big as the bottom of the cake, so like a 6-inch one. I haven't, so I've found leftover bits of fondant I'm just pushing under the gap just to make sure it doesn't fall over or go anywhere. Now, while that's all set in, I'm going to roll out my fondant. You want it big enough that it's going to cover that skirt. Don't worry if it doesn't go to the very bottom, to the board, I should say, as long as it goes to the bottom of the cake itself, because we're going to put ruffles on that edge later on. So try watch out for creases and pleats. Pull your fondant out a little bit and just gently rub that down. And I'm going to cut all this bit off the bottom because I want to save that for later, because I'm going to need it for ruffles. Also make sure you've got some left over for arms as well. Now I'm just going to take a small piece, this time in modelling paste, guys, so not the fondant but the modelling paste, that's just going to sit on the very top of my cake, just so it makes the cake fit exactly with the body. So I'm going to push my body in for the time being just to see what it's like. If your body hasn't set, guys, I wouldn't advise doing the cake part at all. I would wait while that body has had time to firm up and then work on your cake. So I'm just checking here that it fits. If that piece there is a bit wide, you can always squeeze it a little bit closer together. And then what I'm going to do is just make some more paint colour. So again, that's the aubergine one. And what we're going to do now is paint stripes on the skirt. Now it turns out I am awful at painting stripes. It wasn't bad at all on the body because it was a small piece, but on this big skirt, I could not paint a straight line at all. So it might be that if you're the same as me and you're really bad at painting straight lines, it might be easier to roll a darker kind of purpley burgundy colour of fondant, roll it nice and thin and cut it into strips and stick it on rather than painting it on. I did try with a ruler in the end and it was a little bit easier. My lines were a little bit straighter, but they still weren't neat. Now I've got some of the leftover fondant and we're going to cut a disc because I forgot my circle cutters. And I'm just going to make sure it's big enough that it covers the join from that top piece that we added to the skirt itself. And we'll cut a little V out. It's quite a wide shaped V. Then we're going to push that on there again. Just going to press it down. Now, if it doesn't stick, just put a tiny bit of water or edible glue under there to hold it in place. Again, putting the body back on, checking that it all fits okay. And then what I'm going to do is draw in any lines that she has for seams on the dress. And any stitching marks are going on there as well. Do you guys like my t-shirt? It's my favourite t-shirt. Okay, so she needs more buttons now down the front of this bit. And obviously we need to add stripes as well. I am going to give my stripes on the skirt a second coat as well because they're a little bit uneven. Some of them are quite see-through. Let's go over the edge of this bit here. And then let's paint some more stripes on. Then I'm going to roll some big long strips for the ruffles that go around the bottom. You probably don't need them bigger than an inch in height for each one. We're going to paint the stripes on. And then what I'm going to do is concertina it up a little bit. Okay, so we've painted stripes on. You can wait for it to dry if you want, or if you're impatient like me, you can start sticking it on. If you've got a bit of a dip under where the skirt ends, you're going to need to fill it out a little bit so that the frill has something to stick onto. If you baked extra cakes, it would be cake under there, that would be fine. You can just stick it onto there. So you can see we've put in one layer on and then a second layer, concertina it as you go along. It's very messy if you leave them wet, guys, so maybe just give them a little bit of time to dry, but not too long because your fondant will want to crack as you're bending it if you let it dry for too long. And then my third layer of it, I'm just cutting a bit thinner, and then we're just going to push that on so it just meets with the edge of the bottom of the skirt. And you're going to do this all the way around, so you'll do the front and back. At the moment I've only done the front just to show you guys, but I will do the back. Now before I use all my paste, I'm just going to make some arms just to make sure I've got enough. So I'm going to roll 2 thin sausages, and I'm going to measure them so they go from like her shoulder to the line on that bit of the skirt. I don't know what to call it, that bit. Can you guys see whereabouts it goes to on the video? Kind of a hip height. And I'm going to keep them in a really simple position because they're quite thin arms, they're quite bendy, so they're going to hold their shape better if they're just downwards like that. I'm going to take 2 balls and we're going to roll them out so they're a little bit more lemony shaped or leaf shaped, however you guys want to describe them. And we're going to wrap them over each shoulder. I think I could have maybe gone a little bit bigger with this. Sometimes you can't tell till you've finished. And then we're going to paint the stripes on those sleeves and arms so it matches everything else on the dress. Just going to lighten up her collar a tiny bit with a bit of white. We're going to make 2 ovals in a pale skin tone for her hands. Flatten them down a little bit. We're going to cut out a little triangle out of each side to create a thumb. Now, if you struggle with hands, you can just keep them as this mitten kind of shape. If not, you can cut some more fingers into them. So I'm going to go for long, thin, pointy fingers. And you can do exactly the same on both hands. Just make sure when we position them on her body that the thumbs are kind of pointing forwards, not backwards. And then we're just going to use some water to stick that under the arm itself. You probably want to press it against the skirt and the arm. If it doesn't want to hold, just use some edible glue, but then just put a cocktail stick or toothpick, guys. I forget they're called different things in different places. Just pop that under each hand until it's had a little bit of time to set. The glue or water will hold it in place, probably even only after 10 minutes, and then you'll be able to remove those sticks. We're going to roll some tiny little frills for the edge of her sleeves, so the cuffs. Just concertina in them. And that's just going to go around the bottom of the sleeve and onto the hand. Just be careful you don't knock the hand off. And then she's about ready for the head. So if everything's a bit soft, just give her a few hours to firm up and then you can add the head. Decide which direction you want it to be looking in. And I haven't finished the frills yet, guys. I do need to finish the frills. But the other thing you are going to need to do is put a thin strip just around that top frill there, like that. Do you guys prefer Victoria? Or, do you know what? I've forgotten what's the character called in Corpse Bride that is the Corpse Bride? I just know it as the Corpse Bride. You can tell it's a little while since I've watched that film. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what she's called. But also let me know if you prefer this doll cake from the Corpse Bride or the other one that I did a while ago. there she is, all finished. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Don't forget to check out all my other doll cake videos. And please excuse the giant courgettes in the background. I have borrowed my mum's kitchen. Thanks for watching. Bye. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and leave me a comment below. You can see more of my tutorials by clicking on the images on screen now. If you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button to stay up to date with my future tutorials. There are also links in the description box below where you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and more.